So let us first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. This evening, we're delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Robbie, a long-standing friend, musician, scholar, librarian, guest speaker, and that's Robbie. Tonight, Robbie will be talking with us on the subject of Jungian cosmology. Carl Jung's efforts to integrate a scientific worldwide view with a spiritual psychology is grounded in his concept of synchronicity, the observation of the underlying cause unity of each moment in time. Robbie will present a scientific description of the causal unity of the solar system, as we see, as the spiritual and actual home of humanity, expanding Jung's Earth-centered perspective in psychology to explore how the temporal structure of the solar system governs our culture and spiritual evolution and provides the context to understand the fragile sensitivity of our living planet. And if you're glued to the TV, you see a lot of information about the planet just of recent days. Robbie Tulip has an MA honours degree in ethics and ontology and a career in international development. His primary interest is building practical understanding and strategic vision of methods in reverse global warmings, incorporating insights from psychology and climate science. Hello, Jude. Great to see you. Following Robbie's presentation, we'll have a short break and resume for discussion and questions, finishing by 10 p.m. Note we'll be recording this event for later reference. If you're here on Zoom, please remain muted while Robbie is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments and we'll open up later for discussion. But thank you, Robbie. It's great to have you here tonight. And your lovely music tonight. It's very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Well, it's such a great pleasure to be able to share with you some thinking about Jung and cosmology and Jungian cosmology. It's something that has been an interest of mine for many decades, since I really started to explore these ideas when I was at university. And this first diagram, what I'm going to do is I'll just go through my slides and just speak off the cuff to my slides rather than using a written presentation. And I'm happy to take questions along the way, or it might be easier if we wait until after the break. But if you've got something burning, then please jump in. So this picture is not for the solar system. This is more the universe from our perspective of visual astronomy. And what you see is the yellow circle is the path that the sun takes through the stars. It's called the ecliptic or the zodiac. And the band of stars that goes through the middle is the Milky Way. And this is looking, this is taking the solar system from the southern hemisphere perspective. So if I can point here we've got Orion, with the belt of Orion, then Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, and Canopus is the second brightest star in the sky. So Sirius, the dog star, and Canopus of the great ship. And this one here, can anybody guess what that one is? No, that's the Pleiades are in Taurus, the shoulder of the bull. But this is the Large Magellanic Cloud, and it's actually that point there is the south pole of the sun. So the whole of the Earth slowly revolves around the Large Magellanic Cloud. It's an interesting thing. I think of it as the turtle at the bottom of the universe. So anyway, there we've got the the Milky Way and the constellations of the zodiac, and I'll come back to that. Jean kindly read this already, so I'll read it again. Jungian Cosmology. Carl Jung's effort to integrate a scientific worldview with a spiritual psychology is grounded in his concept of synchronicity, the observation of the underlying causal unity of each moment in time. In this talk, I will present a scientific description of the causal unity of the solar system as the spiritual and actual home of humanity, expanding Jung's Earth-centered perspective in psychology can explore how the temporal structure of the solar system governs our cultural and spiritual evolution and provides the context to understand the fragile sensitivity of our living planet. Now, this is based on two papers that I've had published over the last, this year and 2 years ago in Correlation, which is the research journal of the British Astrological Association. And it's partly that my work is in astrology, but it's also that I'm working on the boards of astrology and astronomy and psychology. So the first paper, wait a minute, I've got the date wrong. The Braid of Time is the one that I've just had published this year, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune cycles as cultural paradigms. And the second one, The Physics of Astrological Ages, was actually published in 2022. That's a mistake there. It should say 2022. So back to this sky map of the Milky Way and the zodiac. Now, the reason I've put this up is that understanding of the visible cosmos was central to ancient religion, but was suppressed by religious orthodoxy and is only present now in a concealed form. And that's a really important theme in Jung's work. As Jung studied Gnostic thought, this whole question of what is concealed behind beneath the surface of conventional religion. So let's have a look at this line from Revelation 22, the river of life and the tree of life. The angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. Now, as we all know, there's no such thing as a tree that grows on both sides of a river. And so that is the first clue to ask, what could they possibly have meant by describing a tree that grows on both sides of a river? As it happens, it's an exact parable for looking up into the sky and seeing the relationship between the zodiac, the 12 fruits, one for each month, and the river of life, the Milky Way that flows, the great crystal river. And so there's this theme that the visible heavens were a central idea in ancient religion, but somehow that all got written out of the dogma through Christendom. And yeah, so here again, the zodiac stars and the Milky Way in the version that I had up earlier. And so I did some artwork on this. What I've got here, rather than using the northern part of the Milky Way, I've used the southern part of the Milky Way, stretching from Sirius in the top right corner down through the Southern Cross and down to Scorpio. And you can sort of pick out the Southern Cross here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 stars at the cross. I've used the cross as a tree, and just imagine this idea of a river cascading down through the middle of the tree, and I've shown the Large Magellanic Cloud as the turtle at the bottom of the universe. So it's just a way of picking up some of the artistic imagination that comes out of this, I suppose, a spiritual cosmology. So I was a bit lazy, and so I decided to just go to ChatGPT and get them to write my talk for me. And I'll just briefly, I'll go through a few things. Just as I found it really useful as a way of getting an authoritative, clear overview of Jung and cosmology, because I suppose a lot of people aren't so clear on what the role of cosmology was for Carl Jung. So his views were influenced by his interests in psychology, mythology, alchemy, and spirituality. But he did hold that his views were compatible with science, although in a very contested sort of way. He explored cosmological ideas through archetypes, symbolism, the collective unconscious, linking them to human experience and the psyche. And the collective unconscious, and I should just tell you that was the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of writing and wisdom. And the thing that he's holding is it's called a Merkaba, and it's a symbol of the union of the heavens and the earth. So it's also called a stellated octahedron, and it's used as a symbol of the heart chakra. So anyway, it's an old symbol, the Merkaba. The collective unconscious and archetypes. Jung believed that the collective unconscious contains universal archetypes, recurring symbols and motifs found across cultures and time, often with connections to cosmological ideas embodying the cycles of creation, destruction, and transformation that are mirrored in the natural and cosmic world. So this icon of the resurrection is an example of the cycles of creation, destruction, and transformation that are embodied in the archetype of Christ as Messiah. And astrology, Jung had a strong interest in astrology. He saw it as a symbolic system reflecting the archetypes of the human psyche. He believed that astrology could provide insight into the synchronicity between cosmic events and human life. For example, he saw the planetary movements as correlating with psychological states or life stages, though not in a causal, deterministic way, but rather as part of a meaningful pattern or a causal connection. Synchronicity in the cosmos. Jung's concept of synchronicity, the idea that meaningful coincidences occur without a direct causal link, has a cosmological dimension. He argued that certain events in the universe and in human life are connected by patterns of meaning. I find this idea of patterns of meaning a very intriguing one, rather than by immediate cause and effect. Jung saw this as a way of linking the inner world of the psyche with the outer world of the cosmos, suggesting a deep connection between the human mind and the structure of reality. Mythology and cosmology. Jung explored ancient cosmological myths, particularly those that describe the creation of the universe or the nature of reality. Myths of creation, destruction, and rebirth were central to his understanding of the psychological process of individuation. He often compared these myths to alchemical processes, viewing the cosmos as a reflection of the inner journey of transformation. And I hope people are familiar with this painting from the Hall of the Dead, with the dead person being brought hand in hand with Anubis, the jackal god, for the weighing of the soul. And you see the person's heart on the left-hand side of the scale, and the feather on the right-hand side of the scale, and the alligator ready to crocodile ready to chomp up anybody whose heart is bigger than a feather. And Thoth, the god of wisdom, is recording the results. And then Horus accompanies the dead person to meet Osiris, who is accompanied by Isis and Nephthys. And the four sons of Horus, I think, are standing on the water lily. And these myths, they have such extraordinary resonance. Let me tell you my understanding of this story. So Osiris has much the same name as Lazarus. And so the story of Lazarus that John says is the reason why Jesus got crucified has this extraordinary secret heritage in Egyptian mythology, because you've got Horus as an analogue for Jesus and Isis and Nephthys as Mary and Martha. Now that's That's an idea that was presented in the 19th century. I find it absolutely compelling, but it's so offensive to Christian orthodoxy that it's been just completely excluded from view. But it's that sort of idea that Carl Jung found really interesting, you know, just to say you've got this many thousands of years old story of Osiris as the message of the resurrection of new life. And how does that relate to Christianity in a way that's not just, you know, bound down by dogma? So Gnosticism and alchemy, is another point. I'm actually going to just give people a few seconds to have a glance at that. Alchemy as symbolic stages of transformation as a metaphor of individuation. And I'm not going to read it all the way through. Now, Jung believed that exploring cosmic symbolism could help us understand our inner world. He said, our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe. And we have here this image of the snake eating its own tail as a symbol of the cyclic patterns of reality. Now, that's all been sort of throat-clearing introduction, just a sort of general introduction to Jung and cosmology. And I'm going to get on now onto some of the things that I found really interesting. This one is on the paper that I gave on Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune as the braid of time. And the reason I've put this picture up is that this is, we could go outside right now and see Saturn in this position, because this is its current position in relation to the stars. And we could find the tractor wheel in Aquarius and the circlet in Pisces, forming a neat triangle with Saturn. And if we had a telescope with a disc with a lens 1 foot across, then we could also see Neptune. But Neptune's remarkably faint and difficult to spot. And I'm putting this up because I'm going to explore this question of the structure of the solar system and the relation of the planets Saturn and Neptune. Now, I've turned the picture upside down so that we can see it from our perspective in the southern hemisphere. Once again, Saturn, the tractor wheel on the left and the circlet on the right, and Neptune. And Saturn will catch up to Neptune in 18 months' time, in 2026. And that X spot in the middle, that is the equinox. So the yellow line is the path of the sun, and the white line is the celestial equator. And you would have heard the concept of precession of the equinox. Really big idea for Carl Jung. I gave a talk a couple of years ago on his book Aeon, where he explores the precession of the equinox. Now, what's happening is that white line is gradually, at the time of Jesus, that white line crossed the yellow line here, and it was when the equinox point crossed this green line is called the first fish of Pisces. And then this line up here, this is the second fish of Pisces. So the constellation of Pisces, I can just go back to a picture of it. And here we see Pisces, the first fish at 90 degrees to the path of the sun, the second fish going along the path of the sun. See, there's the circlet and the tractor wheels up there. So since the time of Jesus, the equinox has moved from here, which was the start of the age of Pisces, up to here. So it goes around, it takes 26,000 years to go around the whole circle. And now I want to just help us to reflect on orders of magnitude, because like we often hear that astrology is about the stars, but in fact, Western astrology is entirely about the solar system. Like the stars are just background markers. So I haven't got a 10-cent piece. I was planning to have one with me. But if anyone's got a 10-cent piece, here I've got a 5-cent piece. That's amazing, but close to. So 10-cent piece. If we imagine them tossing it to the umpire, we can just see the umpires there in the middle of the Sydney cricket ground tossing a 10-cent piece. Now, if that 10-cent piece is the whole size of the solar system out to Neptune, so that means 9 billion kilometers wide, then, so we've got this 9 billion kilometer wide 10-cent piece, and the closest star, 4 light years away, is way on the outside of the oval. And there's absolutely nothing in between that 10-cent piece and that next star. That is just how very isolated we are in the galaxy. And so that's why I like to think of the solar system as our home. And there's a lot of really interesting scientific books about, you know, if it wasn't for Jupiter, there wouldn't be any life on Earth, you know, if it wasn't for the structure of the solar system. So rather than just saying, oh, you know, we live in Canberra or we live on the Earth, we actually are creatures of the solar system. And so, yeah, 40 trillion kilometers away is Alpha Centauri. That's a long way. And this is a diagram that I made from NASA data. And what it is the distance from the sun to the center of mass of the solar system. Now, I'll explain that. If you imagine the solar system zooming through space, and say all of the planets are together on one side, then from the whole system is following a smooth arc around the galaxy. But as the planets orbit around the sun, they pull the sun in and out of the center of mass. So they are orbiting this point called the solar system barycenter, or the center of mass. And this shows how the distance from the sun to the center of mass has changed over the last 6,000 years. So this is actually the integral function of everything in the solar system over the whole of human history. So everything on Earth has occurred inside this graph. So it starts at the bottom. Each line is 179 years. And what you can see is that it's like ripples in sand, that they're not completely even. They change. So it's got a very subtle change. So that's the sort of cosmology. And every bump in the wave is like 20 years, and that's caused by Jupiter and Saturn. And the reason each 179-year line is almost exactly the same, you can only see a couple of little chinks where there's a difference between two successive lines. But if you compare the bottom to the top, they're completely different. But and that's because of the influence of the planet Neptune. So this is just an astronomical study that I found really fascinating. And delving into it further, I was able to make these flower patterns. This just shows the position of the sun in relation to the center of mass over 179 years. And then I'm going to show you an interesting thing, because as we go through each successive one, you can see that each flower pattern is just subtly different from the previous one. And these this is like the pulse of the sun. That's how I look at it. And so we can just see that that's going backwards in time and then forwards in time. Again, this is just using public data that's available from NASA. So I found it a really interesting way to think of the solar system as a whole. And this gets onto, this is a key graph, which is a bit mind-bending in my last paper, because with this 179-year pattern, the interesting thing is that if we look at when the main cause of this pattern is a rhythm of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. And I just remembered that I made a model of this pattern, and I was going to bring it along tonight, and I forgot, so I apologize for that. But the thing is that this pattern has been stable for the last 4 billion years. You know, our solar system has the big gas and ice giants. They've got the most incredible stability, and they've just been doing the same thing as this pattern. And what you've got is you've got 5 families of triple conjunctions. And the way it works is that when the line is at the bottom of the graph, then you've got a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, which is really tight. And when the line is at the top of the graph, then you've got Saturn and Neptune are opposite Jupiter. Now, that might be slightly complicated, but what it means is that you've got these families of triple conjunctions. And so once again, for example, here from 53 AD, and the interesting thing is that each successive triple conjunction is in the next zodiac sign. So what we've got is, at the scale of the whole solar system, we've got a mirroring of our annual pattern of the sun going from one sign to the next. So these cliffs, like this one, is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. And then because it's not exactly the same, it skips 1 in 7 of the signs. But what this means is that in 53 AD, there was a triple conjunction in Pisces, then 232 AD, triple conjunction in Aries. And I find this a really interesting phenomenon in terms of the overall structure of the solar system, because these families of triple conjunctions that flow from one sign to the next have an extraordinary correlation with history. So the way I look at it is to say, well, this family through the first millennium was governed the culture of that millennium. And then that family, since then, has become very weak. So we're up to here now. This is the, I mentioned before that Saturn and Neptune will be conjunct in 2026. And so they're a fair way away from Jupiter, but so it means that there was a family of conjunctions that was strong 2,000 years ago and is now weak. And to me, that reflects how the thinking of Christendom was dominant 2,000 years ago and has fallen away. And so this next family has had its strongest point in the year 1523, just around the time of the Reformation, again in Pisces. And so that's the family of triple conjunctions that's tightest for us now. And we can see that it had triple conjunctions in Aries in 1703, Taurus 1882. The next one coming up is Gemini in 2061. And so I think of these as what can be called the house of the age, because the really amazing thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that this 179-year period between each of these events is exactly 1/12 of an astrological age. So the Earth has got this amazing wobble, and the wobble takes nearly 26,000 years. And if you divide that by 12, then the period is 2,148. And if you divide that by 12, the period is 179. So what you've got is this extraordinary discovery that the astrological ages, which were a primary interest of Carl Jung, have got this exact correlation with this basic structure of the solar system that drives the whole pattern of the center of mass. The integral function of the solar system is in deep resonant harmony with the structure of time for our planet. And this is all completely scientific information. Like the problem with this sort of material is because of the associations with astrology, people just automatically dismiss it and they just say, oh, that's nonsense. But I assure you that this is all just quite empirical. This is just empirical information. And so I was pleased to get this article published on it this year, and I'll be giving a talk at a conference in London in January on this material. So what have we got next? This is just another way of looking at the same data and highlighting the areas where the families are strongest at the bottom of the chart. So what we have is the classical family, the Christian family. I'm sorry, I've got them in the wrong order there. The modern family, then the light green is the Aquarius family and Capricorn. So 5 families. These families have been going around and round for 4 billion years without since the migration of Neptune put the face on the man in the moon. That was called the late heavy bombardment. That was the last big big crisis of our solar system, and we've been stable ever since. And it's that stability that's allowed life to evolve on Earth. So as above, so below. The dominant patterns of our solar system reflect the dominant patterns on Earth. 5 braided conjunction families of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune produce the dominant pattern of the solar system. The period of dominance of each family is reflected in the rise and fall of successive cultural visions. So I'm going to take the rest of my time on another topic, which is another area of research that I've done, which again relates intimately to Jung's cosmology, and that is the perihelion. Now, the perihelion is the spot in Earth's orbit where we get closest to the sun each year. So the orbit is an ellipse, it's not a perfect circle, and on the 3rd of January, thereabouts, every year, we have perihelion day. And the point that's farthest from the sun is called the aphelion. So this is a graph I made just from scientific data of the advance of the perihelion date over 2 decades. And it, as you can see, it bounces back and forth. And the reason for that is partly the position of the moon, partly the function of leap years. But you can see the trend line that by the year 2030, on average, the perihelion will have advanced from 3 January to 4 January. So it advances by about 1 day every 58 years. And this has been discovered in climate science as the main cause of ice ages. It's quite extraordinary because, and the reason is that going back to this picture, if the perihelion, like most of the continents of the Earth are in the northern hemisphere, and so when the perihelion is in June, then the snow that fell in the previous winter tends to melt. But when the perihelion is in December, then the snow that fell in the previous winter tends to accumulate, so the glaciers advance. And that was enough to cause all of the multiple cascading feedback systems, together with a couple of other underlying orbital factors, was discovered by a Serbian astronomer, Milankovic. And so you've got this relationship between the perihelion and long-term climate change. And this is a Wikipedia picture of what I'm talking about, showing that because perihelion is now on the 3rd of January, we're now in what we call cosmic winter. But all of this is completely masked by anthropogenic climate change. So for the last 10,000 years since the rise of agriculture, because this orbital factor is so sensitive, it's just been completely swamped by emissions. And this is, I love this graph, but I'm not going to explain it to you because it'll just take too long. But the theme is that the seasons, the 4 seasons all have a different length, and the shortest season is always in perihelion because the Earth goes fastest when it's closest to the sun. That's what Kepler discovered. This is another chart that I made, and what this one's for is to show the red line is the perihelion plus the other orbital factors, and the blue line is sea level rise, sea level. And what you can see is that at the right-hand end here, for the last 10,000 years ago, sea level's been pretty stable. And so we've got used to the idea that sea level is fairly stable. But look back over the last 300,000 years, and you can see sea levels gone up and down by more than 100 meters. And there's this lag between the two lines. The blue line is almost always just to the right of the red line. And what that shows is that it's these orbital drivers, mainly the perihelion, that cause sea level rise and fall. And also the melting of glaciers and so on. So anyway, that's just this sense of how sensitive our Earth is to these orbital factors. But where Jung got interested in related material was in his study of Indian religion. And the extraordinary thing in Indian religion is that this perihelion cycle, roughly 24,000 year cycle of light and dark, exactly matches to the traditional Indian mythology of time. That is, you've got golden ages when you've got perihelion summer, and you've got iron ages, the Kali Yuga, when you've got a perihelion winter. And so on this model, taking the perihelion as the basis of this Indian mythology, and we have to discount the public version that says yugas last for billions of years, because if you look to the ancient literature, it's very clear that the yuga cycle is a 24,000 year cycle and not a 4 billion year cycle. So anyway, there's this extraordinary correlation between this mythology. So people have been in India for 70,000 years. They watched the glaciers advance and retreat and the sea go up and down. And somehow I can't get my head around how it's possible for people to have a cultural continuity over tens of thousands of years. But that seems to be the most plausible hypothesis that I can see as to why there is this correlation between the yugas and the actual orbital drivers of natural climate change. So this is the cycle of climate light, planetary climate light, from 50,000 BC through to 20,000 AD. And so where we are at now, at the present, for the last 10,000 years, the insolation has been falling. And if it weren't for agriculture, then we would be in a new ice age. There was a distinguished scientist, Robbie Tulip, who proved that. He just said the methane from cows and rice was enough to stop the start of a new ice age. Comparing it to the last 10 ice ages, we should be in an ice age, but we're not. So we're now at this turning point. And the way I interpret this is to say our culture is still bound up in the trajectory of fall, and we need a paradigm shift to reverse to a culture of ascent. And that underlies the Jung's concepts of paradigm shift, of spiritual archetypes of coming to a deeper understanding of the structure of time. This is another complicated picture. This is just to show the relationship between the cosmic seasons of the perihelion, astrological ages, and yugas, and the summer light trajectory from ascent descent. Now, it's got, again, an extraordinary correlation with the Christian cosmology, because as we all know, time is 7,000 years long. It started in 4004 BC, and after 6,000 years is meant to be the return of Jesus and the millennium, and all. So this is the mythology that's in the Bible, and so it's extraordinary that this Judeo-Christian concept of fall actually has a direct correlation with the orbital concept of fall. That is, that the perihelion was traversing through the months of September, October, November, December, through the period that Christianity conventionally views as the fall. So we've got this correlation between the broader mythology that Christianity sits within, from writers like Ovid and Hesiod. They said that there's, before the fall, before the Iron Age, there was a golden age, and there were successive ages of silver and bronze, and that's an idea that they got from India. So this yuga concept of the golden age starting. So I've done these calculations of dates just from the astronomy. Those aren't conventional dates, yeah. So anyway, just I'm really interested to put together all of these different traditions and formulate an integral way of understanding these ideas. Because what the Christian tradition says is that we should be like entering the seventh Sabbath millennium at the moment. And so there's this sense of a time of redemption, a time of understanding the collapse that we've had and what we can do about it. And here's another picture I made, just illustrating the what I see as the basis of the famous Christian symbol, the Cairo cross. Because as I was saying before, the white line is the celestial equator, and the yellow line, the path of the sun. And the white line, as the Earth wobbles, it's now reached this second fish and will soon enter Aquarius. That's the meaning of the dawn of the age of Aquarius. And my view is that the Cairo cross was actually made in order to symbolize this observation. But what happened with the Roman Empire was that all of the astronomy just got systematically deleted, because they said, what's important for Christianity is that we have a simple story that we can use for imperial stability. And they found all of the astronomy too complicated. And they said, well, we're not having it. We're just, if you talk about that, then we'll kill you and burn all of the books. And so what's happened is that the only traces of this sort of analysis are in a concealed form. And it's things like what I was saying before about the tree of life, you know, the river, the tree growing on both sides of a river as a symbol for the stars. We don't have anything that says from ancient times that's what it was. And the reason is that if somebody, there would have been those documents, but they were all burnt. Because if you were a monk and you had one of those documents, then the empire said to you, if we find that document, then we'll kill you. And so it was a very, very strong incentive to get rid of this sort of material. But anyway, the Alpha and Omega, it symbolizes this idea of a transition of ages, which we see in the cosmos. Once again, this theme of the band that goes across represents the yuga. ages from gold to silver and bronze and iron, and just exploring how that correlates against the climate change over the last 50,000 years and projected into the future. Now, I'll just conclude with this picture, because I want to tie what I've been discussing into the climate change situation. So this is produced by the esteemed Canberra climate scientist Will Steffen, who passed away, I think it was last year. And what he wanted to show was the risk that we face of a hothouse Earth. And so if we imagine going back, so this is looking at the Earth over the last 10,000 years. And so we're invited to imagine the Earth as like a marble on on this map that's curvy. And if the Earth, before that time, the Earth was always in that blue valley on the left. That is, for the last 1,000,000 years, we've had ice ages every 100,000 years. Every 100,000 years, the Earth just popped up onto that lip and then back down for another 100,000 years in the big blue glacial valley. But what's happened over the last 10,000 years as we've heated the planet up is that the Earth has moved over into this hot side, well away from its previous stability. And so we're now at a point where we have a choice between Earth system stewardship and biosphere degradation, with the concepts that Will Steffen and his colleagues in this paper, Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene. And so we've got this planetary threshold into a hothouse Earth. So I added some extra data on that. And that is to say, if we continue with business as usual and we just ignore climate change and we don't do anything, then we go straight over the waterfall and into the hothouse. And it's like 4 or 5 degrees, and it's an end of civilization, and it's a collapse of, it's the 6th extinction event, and all of these massive crises. So the solution proposed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is that we cut the amount of greenhouse gases that we're adding. And what that would do to this, this business as usual line, which has, the usual is just off to the left. It's meant to be on the red line. I'm sorry, when transferring this from another format, it just didn't quite, I didn't make that correction. So there we have business as usual into the hothouse. If we cut our emissions by the most that we possibly can, so like at the moment we're emitting 50 billion tons of CO2 or so and methane every year. If through massive effort we're able to cut that to 40 billion tons a year, then we would still get into the hothouse. Like it's just, it would take a little bit longer. It would just sort of bend the needle slightly. If though we took an even further step and removed greenhouse gases on a really massive scale. So there's 1 trillion tons of greenhouse gases that are causing warming. And if we were able to remove more of those greenhouse gases than we add, then we would bend the needle even further. But it reminds me of when I went skiing and I got onto a slope that was a little bit too steep for me. And I went down about 10 meters and I thought, whoop, that's too steep. I want to get out of here. But it's not very easy. And so that brings me to what I'm particularly interested in, that re-brightening the planet. And that is that if we reflect more sunlight back to space, then we're able to buy time for the slower processes of repairing the carbon greenhouse gas issue, because fixing the greenhouse gases will take centuries, and it's possible for us to increase planetary albedo, that is brightness or reflectivity, sufficiently in this century to prevent catastrophic climate change. But what we face is a major cultural barrier, and that is that there are very strong voices who say that that is just completely unacceptable, and that we must not allow any rebrightening of the planet whatsoever. And that's the view that remains the dominant view. So all of this sort of argument that I'm presenting is not allowed in public, as far as I've been able to discover. And so there's very little advocacy of this sort of a shift in policy, and even discussion of whether it would be a good idea. Like when people try to discuss it, they're told, no, you're not even allowed to discuss it. That was what happened at the United Nations Environment Assembly this year. And so I find the cosmology that Carl Jung presents in many of his great books, and I think in particular Aeon, where he explores the concepts of the astrological ages, to be really enlightening in helping us to understand what it means to think globally, and to understand the fragility of our Earth, the sensitivity of our Earth, and understanding these themes around the great natural cycles prior to the rise of industrial civilization is of great value in thinking about what are the underlying patterns that we should be looking to understand in order to think, how can we redeem the Earth? How can we fix the Earth? How can we repair and restore the climate? And so finding a way to integrate the spiritual psychology of Carl Jung with climate science has been a research focus for me that I've just been pleased to be able to share with you this evening. And I'll conclude at that point and look forward to discussing these issues further with you after supper. Thank you.
To think about this is there's an influence, but it's not deterministic. It's that we can still become who we need to be, individuate and do a journey. Like it's not predetermined, but it's important to understand the forces, I guess. I just wondered how you see it in terms of the impact on us as individuals.
Okay, a couple of things. Firstly, when we talk about the stars, the nature of Western astrology actually has nothing whatsoever to do with the stars, and that's something that a lot of people find really surprising, because the stars are simply background markers for phenomena that physically are entirely caused by the Earth and the Sun. So the way the signs of astrology are determined is from the dates of the equinoxes and the solstices, and then those two axes divide the year in four, and then the resonance of that fourfold division year. And so the stars are simply background markers. And so, for example, astronomers will often say astrology is disproved because of precession of the equinox, because the stars aren't where they used to be in relation to the seasons. But that's just a basic misunderstanding of the physics of astrology. Now, on the question of influence, I think the reality is that astrological influences are extremely weak, and but what they've got that compensates for their extreme weakness is extreme stability. That is, they've been the same for the whole evolution of life on Earth. And well, when I say that, except that the continents have moved around, but they've been the same for the last million years. And and so we've got this underlying natural signal, but we live in a very noisy environment. And so the signal to noise ratio means that it's very difficult to measure an astrological signal. And so this is actually a fascinating area of astrology. There are a number of statisticians who've worked on trying to measure the astrological signals in a statistically rigorous way. And it remains just a matter of dispute and controversy, with the astrologers saying that they've proved that there are planetary effects, and their critics just coming up with all sorts of reasons to ignore it, because there's very strong antagonism in the universities and in religion against astrology. And so there's a general unwillingness to investigate astrological claims in a scientific way. And often people will claim that they've done an investigation, but the methodology is very flawed, or was designed to get a negative result. So when you've got a very weak signal like that, it's what I would like to see is epidemiological study. And so that means take like 1 million records of birth and death, and then run that through machine learning systems to find out if there are any planetary aspects and positions that come up as more than chance or less than chance. And so I think that there's plenty of room for the research into that. I mean, that drifts off a bit from what you were asking, but is that helpful? Yeah. Thank you.
Space.
Yes.
And I was just wondering how anyone would attempt to do that. I mean, you're also saying that people don't want to discuss it. It must be risky for some reasons as well. But how would you actually try and attempt that?
Yeah, there's extensive academic study in physics, astrophysics, and atmospheric physics. And there's a whole modeling community. It's known as geoengineering or solar geoengineering. And there are several methods that are under very active research. And the best known of them is called stratospheric aerosol injection. And that was developed from the observation that the Mount Pinatubo volcanic eruption in the Philippines in the early 1990s injected so much aerosol into the high atmosphere that it cooled the planet down by 0.5 degree. And when people saw that it's possible for a volcano to cool the planet down temporarily like that. It got them thinking, well, if we did this in an organized way, would we be able to mask global warming? That is, temporarily slow global warming until we can sort out the greenhouse gas problem. And so it's extremely controversial, but because for two reasons: the uncertainties about side effects and the difficulty of organising it on a global basis, but also the main concern is that there's a popular view that if we do re-brighten the planet, reflect more sunlight, then that cuts the pressure needed to cut our CO2 emissions. And if we stop cutting our CO2 emissions, then we're going to have faster global warming. They're very complex debates, but I mean, my sense is that we're not making any progress with cutting emissions, and we're just at such a high risk of extreme weather and sea level rise that really the only thing that we can do is to use solar geoengineering. So it may be that stratospheric aerosol injection might not be the best initial way to do it. The other technology that's been widely proposed as an initial effort is to make ocean clouds brighter to reflect more sunlight. And the way you would do that is that clouds have already got a lot of salt in them just naturally from sea spray. But if you artificially make the salt particles really tiny, like at the moment, the salt particles are about, I think, 20 microns across. If you make them half a micron across, or that sort of order of magnitude, then those aerosol particles will go up into the clouds and they will reflect enough sunlight to, if you did it around the whole world, then it would cost something like $20 billion a year, which is just a tiny fraction of the damage that we're currently inflicting with climate change, like in particular hurricanes in the Atlantic. If we used marine cloud brightening to cool down the ocean water where hurricanes form that currently hit into the Caribbean and the USA, some of those hurricanes cause $200 billion worth of damage. So if you spent 20 billion making sure that instead of a category 5 hurricane, you're only going to get a category 2, then that's something that the insurance industry should be investing in. At the moment, the politics are such that there hasn't been the support for that investment. But there's, like, for example, there was a major article in Newsweek, very prominent American magazine last week, saying this is absolutely essential, must do it straight away. And similar articles in a number of other magazines, like the Washington Post has published that same argument. Not much conversation about it in Australia, although Australia actually has the lead. We've funded, the Australian government has funded a project to use marine cloud brightening to prevent coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. And that project's been going for a few years now, but they still haven't worked out a feasible way to make the submicron aerosol particles in a stable way and cheap way. And so, but there's a lot of people around the world working on that. There's just not very much money in the research, but my sense is that it's the sort of thing that's just as important as the COVID vaccine, and if we just should put that sort of worldwide resource into it. Thank you.
I've actually got 2 questions, but if we stick with the last discussion, are you thinking not only of the clouds, but actually of the Earth's surface in the sense of its albedo? how much of the Earth is still covered by white ice compared to black areas of asphalt or bits of bitumen in our cities, because that can impact the reflectivity of the Earth as a whole.
Absolutely, and there's four main factors in albedo, and they are snow, ice, clouds, and aerosols, as well as human surfaces. And what's been happening is that with global warming, especially the snow and ice cover around the world has been falling, and it's been getting dirty. And so the amount of reflection of sunlight back to space is in free fall. It's collapsing. It's fallen by 2% this century. So in the year 2000, the Earth reflected about every square meter of the Earth on average reflected 100 watts of sunlight, and which is about a third of the incoming sunlight. That's fallen from 100 watts down to 98 watts over the last 25 years. And that's, there's a counterintuitive thing, which is you would think that with global warming, that because it evaporates more seawater, that's going to make more clouds. But what happens is it does make the air more humid, but the extra heat inhibits the cloud formation. So there's actually been a decline in cloud cover. There's also been a really catastrophic decision by the International Maritime Organization, which was people have seen that the sulfur that's in shipping fuel is bad for people's health when it's released close to land. And so they came up with this great decision to just ban it. But what they didn't realize was that sulfur in the shipping fuel has a major role in masking global warming. As well, the sulfur that's in coal. When we burn coal, we release a lot of sulfur up into the air, and all of that sulfur reflects sunlight back to space. It actually has a cooling effect. So there have been this series of things. The melting of the poles is pretty catastrophic. Like, you know, last year, I think Antarctica, there was an extra 2 million square kilometers of sea ice that melted. And the Arctic is, and when it melts, instead of reflecting sunlight back to space, it absorbs the heat. And so it becomes an accelerating feedback process. Yeah, so that whole story around albedo, the issue is that it's so much cheaper and quicker to cool the Earth by increasing albedo than by cutting greenhouse gases. But at the moment, the policy is we're not going to do anything about albedo for various reasons.
Very interesting, thanks, particularly about the sulfur. Now, to go back to the astrology, you're talking about a weak planetary influence, as you know, we can measure it or not measure it. What order of magnitude is that compared to the influence of the moon on the Earth? I'm thinking particularly of the impact that the moon has on life on Earth.
Look, I think to quantify it in that way has not yet been done.
Right.
So I would also say that the nature of the energy that produces observed astrological effects has not yet been discovered. And so what we have is this observation of effects, but no explanation of what the cause of that is in terms of any known energy. The way I look at it is that the whole solar system is like, if you can imagine it like a washing machine with a series of paddles that are just one paddle for each planet, going around the central axis and just creating waves and creating like a standing wave within the system. And so you've got this pattern within the solar system as a whole. And then it gets into this Jungian idea that Carl Jung took from Hermetic thinking, which is the concept of as above, so below. That is, that the same causal processes that affect the whole solar system also affect us. You know, we're just like a tiny piece of flotsam on the wave of the solar system. And so we're caught up in the big patterns of the solar system. Now, Isaac Newton followed that up very carefully in order as the basis of the law of gravity, because he observed that the same law of gravity applies to the planets as to us on Earth. And so there is this sense of consistency and coherence, but it's still the case that mechanism and statistical proof are seen as weak. So I've published these articles in Correlation, the research journal of the British Astrological Association. So it's a peer-reviewed journal, and it seeks to maintain high evidentiary standards, and they regularly publish statistical analysis, and we're finding things that just by chance are just like 1 in a million, but that correlate with what's expected from astrological causes.
Actually, from our dear absent John Gillam, who's looking after Kirsten, who's not well tonight, unfortunately. John asks, would you like to ask Robbie if there is any correlation between what he has been talking about and the rise and fall of civilizations, such as the Sumerians, ancient Egyptian, which of course is adorning your chest at this moment? If there is, then does the correlation relate to the overall impact of these civilizations, such as warlike, exploring, cultural, etc.?
Conducted the analysis from begins in around 700 BC and extends through to around 4000 AD. And over that period, there are 5 family groups. So each family group recurs every 6,000 years. So I'm not looking at multiple cycles of these family groups, but just within the one braid. And what we see is that I can put up the diagram. So, my friend Greg, who I always talk about these things with. Greg, I'm just in the middle of the Canberra Jung Society talking about my paper on all of the things that we talk about. So everyone's laughing at me putting you on the spot. So I'm just. Well, I think normally you would put your phone on silent or. Everyone's laughing, Greg. But anyway, I'll talk to you later. No worries. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what we've got here is so this piece of blue. That was when what I've called the classical paradigm was dominant, and there was actually the other version of the chart that explains it more clearly. So there was a series of triple conjunctions in 520, 700 520, 340, 160 BC. Now, this family crossed over with the next strengthening family, and what I found really intriguing in this crossover was that the year when the classical family became weaker than what I've called the Christian family was 49 BC. Now, does anybody know what happened in 49 BC? No. No guesses? That was the year that Caesar crossed the Rubicon. So what happened at that time, that's conventionally understood as the switch from republic to empire. And so the way this model works is that these successive triple conjunctions, when they were tight, they reinforced each other and they enabled that family to dominate world culture. I'm just looking at it from the European history that I'm more familiar with. And so anyway, then the Christian family became dominant became more powerful than the classical family from 49 BC. And then the classical family continued to weaken. And the Christian family had this series of successive triple conjunctions in Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. This Cancer one, the 3 planets were conjunct within 4 days. It was the tightest one in recorded history. And then on to Virgo, Libra. So then I understand that against both classical Christianity and the Golden Age of Islam. And there again, then we have this crossover with what I call the modern paradigm that continues to govern us today, and that became more dominant than the Christian paradigm in around the 14th century. So and then if we look to the future, this green line, I find it so interesting that there was an event in this future family that happened in the year 1917. And I associate that with the Russian Revolution in terms of saying that the futuristic vision that inspired the Russian Revolution was only present in a very preliminary and chaotic form. And that's why the Russian Revolution was such a disaster. It was sort of inspired by utopian futuristic dreams, but without a practical ability to deliver them. So our modern family won't cross over to the next family for another 500 years. These processes are very slow, but what I believe is that it's possible for us to take this sort of analysis and think about how can we understand these different family groups. It's intriguing just that if we just look at Saturn and Neptune, as I mentioned, the next Saturn-Neptune conjunction is just coming up now, and it'll be in 2026 in Aries. But if we look back at the last lot of conjunctions, there we go up 1989, and then the one before that was 1953, and the one before that was 1917, and the one before that was 1882. And the quite astounding coincidence that comes out of those dates is that they were all major turning points in Russian history. So the assassination of Tsar Alexander, the Bolshevik Revolution, the death of Joseph Stalin, the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it offers some sort of hope for a paradigm shift for a transformation of Russian politics from their current disastrous episode with Mr. Putin in the Ukraine.
So you wouldn't like to predict the happy day when Vladimir no longer leads Russia, would you?
Well, if the pattern that has applied previously continues, then we would see a gradual transition from one family to the next occurring in this decade. Yeah, so these coloured lines, each of them are defined by every fifth Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune triple conjunction is part of a family. So for example, if you look at the vertical lines, then the horizontal lines connect every fifth one. And that's simply because of the structure of the solar system. If we go back to these diagrams, these are each showing 179 years, which is the period of final conjunction. And so this diagram, the width of it is 179 years, and it just shows how these three planets are always in the same relationship with each other. And this is mainly driven by Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. Uranus is the fourth influence, but it's the weakest. And there's a whole lot of physics behind that. What it shows is that those three planets are always in the same angle compared to the other two that they were 179 years ago. So you've got these families of triple conjunctions that gradually get tight and gradually get weak, gradually get loose. So in this diagram, the way it works is that when the line is at the bottom of the graph, that indicates that there's a tight triple conjunction between Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. When the line is at the top of the graph, it means that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is opposite Jupiter. So that's a bit of astronomy, which might be a little bit hard to get your head around, but that's the basis of it. Now, I did want to expand on one point, if I can, and that is the use of this sort of approach, this material, in the construction of Christianity, because one of the, as I was saying, my opinion is that early Christianity was intimately connected both with astronomy and with cross-cultural secret wisdom traditions. And but what happened with the construction of the canon of the New Testament was that complexity was left out and only allowed to remain in a concealed form. And so what that creates is the sort of detective opportunity to read through the Bible and try to find concealed evidence of astronomy. And there are an amazing number of examples that support the hypothesis. And I think the Book of Revelation is full of these sorts of images that I've shown with the tree of life and the river of life as a parable for observation of the glorious order of the night sky. But if we look through the Gospels, then one of the most vivid examples is the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 by Jesus with using 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed 5,000 men plus all their families. And either 5,000 in 4 of the stories, 4,000 in 2 of the stories. It's the only miracle that appears in all 4 Gospels and twice in 2 of them. So it was obviously very important to them, but it's very mysterious because it's clearly not a literal historical account. It's a very symbolic rendering because, for example, the 5 loaves and 2 fish, they correspond to the 5 visible planets and the sun and moon, the 7 lights of the sky. The 12 baskets that they use to store all of the abundant leftovers correspond to the 12 months of the year. Interestingly, both the 5,000 and 4,000 men correspond to the number of visible stars in the sky, depending on your latitude. So if you're at the equator, you can see a lot more stars than if you're at the pole. So roughly 5,000 or 4,000. But what's most interesting is that this theme of loaves and fishes, the astrological symbol for fish is, of course, Pisces, the fish. But what's less well known is that the symbol for loaves is the constellation Virgo the Virgin. So the brightest star in Virgo is called Spica, which is named after the ear of wheat. So the traditional symbol shows the Virgin carrying a sheaf of wheat. And so what happened at the time of Jesus was that the equinox axis moved out of its previous alignment in Aries and Libra, that is the ram and the scales, and into a new axis, which is the loaves and fishes. And that this new axis, this new cosmic axis, was the source of universal abundance. So you've got this parable that appears concealed within the miracle of the loaves and fishes. And then there are just so many similar stories, like in John's Gospel, when he talks about Jesus expelling the traders from the temple. He says that what he did was the main thing that he did was he expelled their sheep and cows. And if you have an understanding of this precession of the equinox theory, we're currently almost at the end of the astrological age of Pisces, the fishes. And then for the 2,000 years before that, we were in the age of Aries, the sheep. And for the 2,000 years before that, it was the age of Taurus, the cow, the bull. And so the expulsion of the sheep and cows from the temple has a direct correlation with a new religion coming along and saying the old religion of Moses is, which was the religion of the ram, is now obsolete, and there's a new dispensation in the heavens, and we're now moving into that new dispensation. And so we can look at that in a similar way today as we look at the whole idea of the age of Aquarius. And of course, Carl Jung was seen as the father of the age of Aquarius, and he was widely revered in the whole New Age movement because of concepts like synchronicity that explore how we're part of this broad river of time that we can't completely explain, but we need to think holistically in this way globally, and think about the the deep currents of time. So that's just another reflection. I mean, it picks up on the slide that I showed with the Cairo cross. And again, my view of the Cairo cross was that, and I'll put it up on the screen again. So this traditional symbol, which of course is the central symbol of Christianity, traditionally the X stands for the CH or Chi in the name of Christ, and the P symbol is the letter Rho in ancient Greek, which stands for the R. So it's the letters CR. And but my observation was just, okay, we had this event where there's a whole lot of literature going back to Plato, which said you've got a moving X in the sky. And so when this X formed by the two great circles of the path of the sun and the celestial equator, when that crossed the first fish of Pisces, that formed this shape of the Cairo cross. But once again, we have and then when Christendom started with Constantine, he saw this sign in the sky, and so my interpretation of that is that the astronomer priests who were advising Constantine, they fully understood this story that of the precession of the equinox, but they deliberately kept it secret in order to make sure that they had a simple religion that they could explain to the masses. And what happened was that this complexity was just comprehensively lost. And one of the things that's hardest to explain is how could it have been so totally lost? And my only explanation for that is to say, if you have 1,000 years of people saying, if you possess any of this stuff, then we'll kill you, then there was a really strong incentive to get rid of this material. I think originally this sort of material was only transmitted by mouth to ear. It was treated, for some reason in the ancient world, astronomy was treated as really secretive. And when you've got something that's really secretive, if you use both the pen and the sword to destroy it, then it's very fragile. So it's not a case of the pen is mightier than the sword. It's a case that the pen and the sword combined are mightier than the tongue and ear. And so it used to be that all of this stuff was just transmitted orally. Nothing was written down. And so it was incredibly fragile. And so that's why there was such successful loss of this. And it's something that George Orwell explores in 1984, just why if you make a concerted effort to destroy knowledge of the past, then you can actually succeed. Robert.
Yeah, you're talking about oral tradition, sometimes transmitted mysteriously for thousands of years. I can't help thinking of the Aboriginal stories that relate clearly to the time when they could cross between Cape Otway and Launceston, through what is now the Tasman Sea, which was what, 10 or so 1,000 years ago, the mini ice age. And how they do that without what we would think of as written records is indeed mysterious. So do you have anything to say about, perhaps explore a little bit more that idea of oral tradition over a very long time? Aboriginal song lines and so forth, which clearly relate to astronomical relations. If you're not careful, a lot of that's getting lost. And
Absolutely. It's one of my favourite themes, Robert, so I'm glad that you brought it up because...
And you didn't brief me about it before.
because one of my... a book that I found really enlightening is The Memory Code by Lynn Kelly. And what she observed, and she's also written a book, co-authored a book on the Indigenous songlines of Australia. And if you go back to the classical literature on the memory code, there's this method that in order to remember a speech, you imagine the house where you grew up, and you first walk in at the front gate and you connect something to the front gate. You go to the letterbox, you connect something to the letterbox, the front door, every little spot in your house, you associate something with that spot. And it's a very effective method for oral memory. And it used, like we are now, unfortunately, I've been turned into a cyborg. I rely on Google for my memory. I've become infantilized when I can't even read a street directory anymore. But it used to be that writing is a relatively new thing in human evolution. We've had brains of our current size for at least 100,000 or 200,000 years, and since before the exit from Africa. As to when language began, it's hotly debated, but let's say, humans have had language for something like 50,000 years. And the issue is that that clans had to have very accurate oral transmission of their cultural lore in order to know what they were doing. And so, especially with the songlines in Australian Indigenous culture, each time they got to a new point on their traditional migration route, there is a story that is associated with that place. And reaching the place enables the group of initiated elders to jointly recite the song, and to anyone who makes a little mistake gets a whack, because they had to maintain the tradition without mutation. And so Lynn Kelly in The Memory Code explores this with reference to Stonehenge in the UK. And she argues that there are a whole lot of holes around the perimeter of Stonehenge that have rotted away. And she maintains that they were used to like roll up a previous, what's the word, nomadic existence before the rise of agriculture, and celebrate that old nomadic songline in one place. So there is this idea that memory was much, much more powerful in the pre-literate world than it is today.
Even thousands of years, it's hard to imagine.
Well, see, this is where, I think it just seems implausible that the Indian people would be able to calculate that glaciers advance and retreat over a 20,000 year period. It's just far too long for history to be practicable. But there you have it. There's this correlation between the advance and retreat of glaciers and the 24,000 year cycle. That's the foundation of Vedic cosmology. And so you've got this correlation, and then you can ask, well, how could they possibly have remembered something like that over such a long period? Which, is just a mystery, really.
And we're not proposing the possibility of aliens having a role in this.
Anything is possible. Carl Jung wrote quite extensively on UFOs, and got quite quite a bit of pushback for his efforts in that space. But
let me just make a little plug on behalf of John. He's published a new book called Challenging the Ancient Astronaut Myth. I'll put it here on the record. Yes. So if you look up John Gillam,
Can I see?
Google, you can see his book. This is part 1, where he's saying that Tom Daniker's chariot of the gods and so forth is not the only way you can explain a lot of the extraordinary things that seem to defy more rational analysis.
sure. Well, I must say that I find the pyramids of Egypt an incredible mystery. Like when you look into the plausibility of the construction of the pyramids, how exact they are, how big they are, it remains just a really profound mystery. And so I think it's important to not close off all of the possibilities there. But it's the Sherlock Holmes principle that when you've excluded everything else, what remains is must be the truth.
Yeah. I'll put a link to this to John and his book on the website. You can buy it electronically or in hard copy.
Well, we've gone past 10 o'clock, so we'll close. Thank you very much. Bye, Jean.
Thank you, John.
So much to think about. I think we're going to have to go home and consult our book. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And have this little certificate for you, for all your efforts. It's only a very small token. We've got your bank details that we. Okay. Well, thank you. You've given us so much to think about. Wow, yeah, amazing. And also you'll be going, Robbie's going off to England to explore more of this, aren't you?
Yes.
So fantastic. So thanks for all your efforts.